Okay, awesome. It says recording. Okay, so I will start. So Journey of a Warrior, the Stan Daniels Healing Center. The first question was, how does the client's childhood experience relate to you? The client's childhood experience relates to mine actually in a lot of similar ways. So my growing up, I actually grew up, I was in and out of the foster system. And so I experienced a lot of substance use, abuse, and mental health. So, and like suicide attempts and all that. So my parents actually are also a product of generational trauma. So my mom's parents were, they used substances and they were addicted to alcohol. And so that passed on to my mom. And then I've got two brothers who also experienced the same. So, and then on my dad's side as well, he was raised with like low income 3 bedroom house and there was 8 siblings. So there was four of them in one room. And so they were living in kind of like I remember him telling me stories that for dinner they would have like bread and gravy, right? So, or mashed potatoes. So my growing up, basically my parents struggled with substance use and alcohol, and in turns they had mental health. And so in the video, one of the clients had stated that you part of this family dynamic was to stay silent and it wasn't talked about. So I never received any therapy and stuff when I was a child or had any social services. If social services came to the door, you were lying. You weren't telling them what was going on, because what was happened in the family kind of stayed in the family. And so my dad to this day still has undiagnosed mental health because he won't get help for it. I remember the first time when social services had stepped in, they had forced us to get therapy. My dad walked out and said, I don't need this, right? And so he withdrew the whole family, thinking like, there's like taboo around mental health and receiving help. My dad was in and out of jail while I was growing up, and he was domestically abusive to my mom. So I experienced a lot of, you know, um, generational and a lot of trauma. So I can kind of resonate with what the clients we're kind of talking about. If anybody wants to, yeah. So if anybody has any similar experiences or maybe even like a different experience and you guys want to kind of chime in on how maybe that resonated with you or maybe it didn't at all.
I'm so sorry that you had to go through this, first of all. But like, I would say that it's common that sometimes this practices happens because sometimes it's in the culture. Like, I am raised in an Indian culture, so it's common to abuse their children. Like, if you did a mistake, you were beaten up or you were given a punishment or something like that. So I think it's the abuse and all is really common and cultural thing, and that really affects you in the future.
I really like how you said that as well too, because when we're looking at the video and the culture, right? We think of, as we learn in this course, the generational trauma and what you've been taught, and that, that's why you stay silent and you don't speak up because you were born into maybe a culture or a family dynamic where those things were seen as normal because every generation before you kind of did the same things, right? You were taught what you were taught and you kind of follow in those footsteps. So I really like that you point that out.
One thing I can definitely like empathize with is that feeling of hopelessness at the lack of like, you know, the sense that no one cares, there's no help, that feels like there is no way out because that's part of the cyclical nature of their history, not in terms of me, but I can relate to that feeling. And I just actually had a question for you since you were able to relate to the clients on such a deep level, did it impact you and touch you like to hear how the services helped them and make you like wish we had more, like, I don't know how to explain what I'm trying to say, but did that impact you in the same way and make you be like, wow, I wish we had that here for our people, like in our
Yeah, so I
community?
ended up watching the video and actually like I thought it to be really interesting. Um and I was really intrigued by it and I thought it was awesome. I'll definitely speak on it when they get to the anti-oppressive question too, because I actually um had that question kind of goes into that question. So I'll definitely answer that as well. But yeah, for sure. So question number two.
I'm question number two, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So question number two is, in what way does this video influence your view of what social work could or should be? Well, being an Indigenous woman myself, I believe that we should incorporate culture into our social work because it does have a lot of powerful meaning behind it. It empowers us, it puts us on the right path, and it connects us, reconnects us to our communities, our families, what's important to our traditions, and it helps us find our trauma so we can live better. And honestly, being in this course and learning my culture, being 40 years old, learning my culture, just learning my culture, I understand where they're coming from. Like it's bringing up a lot of things for me as well. That's why I think like culture is important to this. It but it it clears your mind. It makes you realize what you have done and that you're not the source of the problem, that it's connected down through generations. You know what I mean? Um, and this program helps you live a better life after. Like it gives you hope, um, set you up for a job, for apartment. Like that's what we need, not just somewhere, just give them like the bare minimum, say, okay, here, go live your life. They need more than that. They need support. They need people to talk to. They need community. They need their elders. They need everything that this video has. That's what we need in social work. I don't know what else to say.
Yes, no, that's great. And to kind of build off of that, right? Like we talk about systematic barriers. So there's a lack of resources, and then you think about socioeconomic, your upbringing, if the unemployment, all of those things kind of contribute to why somebody may like in the video
Yes.
when they were talking about like they experienced addiction or they ended up in jail. A lot of those were due to childhood and probably lack of those resources, upbringing, maybe not being able to connect culturally or being
Yes.
supported. So as well is in number two, it says so it says, what is the link between the client's individual or private issue and the broader public issues? You spoke on that. And to just kind of expand, it's a connection between a person's experience. It's usually
Yes.
reflective of the systematic barriers in society.
Yeah,
Yes. That was
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to add on that and just say that it is, yeah, like you said, extremely reflective of like just the gaps in the system and how everything they claim to do, our government claims to do for our indigenous communities, sorry, feels very, well, if you look into it, it is surface level and it isn't, it's very, doesn't actually move toward anything positive or like it just individual experiences heavily reflects our systemic issues.
yes, it does. Absolutely.
Awesome. Um,
Anyone else have something to add to question two?
yep. If anybody wants
Yeah,
to.
I'll add like I do see the link between like the personal self, like the personal issues being as a result of like the social issues because like when they mention that they grew up in foster system or they mention that like oh they grew up and like grew up in poverty like it showed that as a result of being brought up in certain environments. You kind of like live based on the environment that you were brought up in. You kind of live based on like your childhood circumstances. You kind of live it out, even as an adult, or the trauma from what you experienced as a child, it kind of transcends into your adulthood. So yeah.
Yeah, I would like to add a little bit over here. Like, it's sometimes not the circumstances, it's sometimes the circumstances are made. Like, here in Canada, there was like a recreational center where it was really bad thing that happened with the indigenous people. So, like, this also contributes to the same thing that's happening. It's not just that you went to the jail, but it also sometimes the circumstances are made by the people. So for the third question, the third question is identify the two aspects for anti-oppressive social work and demonstrate the challenges faced by San Daniel's Healing Center program and how would you go about resolving them. So I thought the two major issues were the cultural sensitivity and the empowerment, and they both were really taken care of by the center. So the two things that the center did, first of all, for the cultural sensitivity was that they involved elders and leaders that they have already been through and they know the experience, and they talked in the groups so they could really help the others as they have more experience. And the other thing that the people were more afraid was the empowerment. They feel really discouraged and discriminated due to the past traumas that they had. So to encourage that, they rebuild their confidence by allowing them to work and like get the certain portion of certain portion for the income that they earn, so they can get independent and they can gain their confidence back.
Awesome. You actually touched on a lot of things that I also saw when I was watching. So stigma and discrimination was a great one because the stigma behind a criminal and how this can affect some from them being integrated into society. So like employment. And then you spoke on the fact that they were helping them with saving money because cost of living, so systematic barriers as well, right? So cost of living, inflation. So in there, they, it's, I believe, a halfway house. They have a roof over their head and they're provided with meals, but then integrating back into society when the cost of living is extreme might potentially push somebody back into the life that they were involved in if that was, helping them with gaining, money and helping provide for themselves or their family or whatever the case may be, potentially putting them back in jail and repeating that cycle. So I think like systematic barriers are a huge oppressive, I guess, thing for individuals because it's that repetitive cycle of you're in a supported environment, but then you get out back into society and you're single and you've got to put a roof over your head and you got to pay bills and you've got to work full time. And it's just like, we know that's difficult to do, right? So.
And I just wanted to add, I love that in regards to like how would you go about resolving these issues? You said empowerment, and that word is really important to me because from all angles, I feel like, any oppressed group, you're oppressed, you're being pushed down from all angles, it feels like. So to empower these individuals is definitely like a key factor, I believe.
So I viewed it from a different a little bit of a different point of view because like I feel like the empowerment part, I feel like they weren't fully empowered. Like that's my opinion because I feel like they weren't given the option. Like in regards to the employment program or the required saving programs, like they're good options, yes, but I don't think they were given an option to choose the decision for their life. Like, okay, yeah, there's an employment program, there is a savings required program, but it shouldn't be like, oh, you should do those programs in order to leave the healing center. It should be like, oh, here, this is the programs that we have available. We can support you in terms of education. We can support you in terms of finances. We can support you in terms of housing. Like, which one do you want to choose? And then we help you in that area. I feel like they weren't empowered in that sense. Like, it was more like, okay, this is what the program requires. You have to do it in order to get out. And that's what I thought in terms of that. I didn't see necessarily empowerment. I mean, yes, it was a good option, but I didn't see like, oh, they had the right to choose. That's how I viewed it from. They didn't have the right to choose. They didn't have the power. It was still a part of the program's requirement.
Yeah, I see what you mean, where like to be part of the program, you have to sacrifice a bit of autonomy. It's like that. Yeah, I could definitely understand that perspective for sure and agree with it. That's like the struggle of always lacking funding and resources and all these sorts of things is like it does lead to gaps and issues in the systems. I'd like to think that that's to blame for why they would have choice taken away. There's too many factors. But I'm really happy you pointed that out and brought that perspective in
Yeah,
because
and
that's something
like
I
also
hadn't.
to add, sorry,
No,
also
no, go ahead.
I feel like most of the social service programs, like it's operating on a basis where like, oh yeah, it's your life, it's your choice. But at the same time, there's always in between a requirement needed to get the program or to get the service or to get it's like, yeah, it's your choice still, but then in between, like it's actually not my choice. Like you have a rule in there somewhere in between that says, oh, I have to do something in order to get something. So I mean, is it free? Do I have the power? I don't know. I don't think so. Yeah.
I actually love your response, because I think, like, I definitely do agree with you. And that's why when I was talking about the integration back into society, right? Like they were saying they saved like up to 1,500, which I mean is great, but that covers what, like last month's rent. And then if their rent going forward is expensive, and then they've got to buy groceries and they've got to do all those things, it kind of, the system oppresses them anyways, right? So they go to these resources, they get, trying to get up on their feet, but then they get integrated back into society and they're kind of in that same situation.
It's like things aren't as accessible as like our service. It's all back to access. Like it's accessible, but it's not accessible because there's a 10 or a million requirements. Okay. If we're ready, if the group feels ready to, yeah, move on to the next. This might sound a bit formal, but with it being the final question, and I feel like it's an important one, I wanted to really have a concrete answer. But the final question was, what are some of the lessons learned and how do they help you in your future social work practice? So, as a white Canadian social work student, I am grateful to have watched this video and discover and learn about the Stan Daniels Healing Center and all of the lessons and insights it had to offer. I found there were many important takeaways in the video that I will carry with me, not only as a social worker, but just as a white Canadian. This one's a smaller note to make, but it's just something I took away, shame. I was not aware of like the amount of shame that was felt by Indigenous people, or that it was like a leading emotion faced by them due to their histories, traumas, and actions. So on that, I will always take any opportunity to learn and listen and understand their experiences and trauma so that I can be a better ally and support Indigenous peoples. It's just you're learning every day. You never stop learning. Second takeaway is the philosophy of this, or hold on. The philosophy of the Stan Daniel Center is we can't help you if you don't help yourself. There is heavy focus on self-determination and strengths-based perspective in the programs. The application and qualification process utilized to access their services, as we just mentioned, are quite tedious, but I also took away that this is because they want to ensure that they're receiving clients who are ready and that these services will be utilized to their best capacity and ensure success. Like everyone has access, but you need to be ready. You have to help yourself and be committed to helping yourself. And I really liked the acknowledgement of that because as someone who struggled with mental health or my own things, I was really ignorant to that for a while. And it's like, hoping the world will just fix your problems. You have to want to help you too. So I really appreciated that angle and feel like it does ensure higher rates of success. And to attach to that, a quote made by one of the staff was, "The most important thing that we provide is hope." And I feel like that really highlights the importance of the strength-based and the self-determination and giving them hope in themselves. Okay, my last two takeaways are my most important. So my third takeaway is that Indigenous peoples are the experts on knowing how to help their peoples and themselves. So we need to listen to them and give them the platforms necessary to have their voices heard. We need to work together with Indigenous communities toward reconciliation. And a great example of that is I loved hearing from you, Sarah and Tommy, on your experiences and the way you guys related to that, because even hearing that helps me and informs me and, you know, helps me understand. And lastly, I'm sorry, I'm trying to be quick enough to make sure everyone can touch base on it. To achieve true reconciliation, we need to actually invest in our Indigenous communities and provide them with services that do not have 100 gaps in them and that feed the cyclical nature of their oppression. I feel like everything Canada has done to aid in our Indigenous communities has been very surface level and media driven, like just about it looking like we as a country are doing the right things. Most calls to, like at the end of the video, it highlighted one of the calls to action, and that just reminded me of how much there are 94 and it feels like they're all being ignored. I don't know if anyone can speak on any progress on any of them. And the Stan Daniels Center has proven, successful in its own ways towards helping others. So other communities in Canada should attempt to replicate or learn from that. Like I struggle to understand why we don't learn from the professionals in these areas. If something's working, let's replicate that. If the Indigenous peoples are the experts in how to heal people from their experiences, why not listen to them? So yeah, overall my takeaways were listen to understand, I'm going to use my voice for minorities or oppressed people who maybe can't, and also try to give them platforms to use their voice. Fight against the ignorance toward our continued oppression of Indigenous peoples and advocate for them. And lastly, my biggest point is that Indigenous peoples are the experts in their healing. So we need to listen to them and work with them. Sorry, I went on a big tangent.
No, that was great. I really appreciate your response. So thank you for that.
Oh, you want to go ahead and share? Okay, yeah. So the two lessons that I learned and I think I'll take away is when they talked about the inner child work, like reflecting back on like the things that you've experienced as a child, reflecting back on like the beginning of where your trauma started, the beginning of like where like all of these behaviors, the anger, all of the stuff that they were experiencing, where it started from. So I feel like that's something I would use in the future, like everybody, like in terms of dealing with everybody, and taking into consideration like your childhood as to like, oh, your childhood being an influence to the person that you are today. And in terms of like specifically focusing on the Indigenous people, like one thing to carry on is like the inclusion of their ceremonies, the sweat lodges and all of that. Those cultural sensitive stuff, like making sure it's included in part of their healing journey. It's included in like their care plan and whatever you're working with, like connecting them back to spirituality and their culture. Yeah.
Would anyone else like to add? No? Awesome, guys. I'm gonna end the recording, okay?